Okay, so some challenges to law reform. So there's all of these different ways that we've spoken about that uh, law reform can come about, all of these ways that things can be investigated and things like that. But there are, of course, challenges that can make it all quite tricky. So one of them is social divisions. So often the parliament is unwilling to legislate in areas that may be contentious or divide public opinion, um, which also does sort of intersect with this idea of politics. They want to keep voters on side, um, and they don't want to make decisions that are really contentious in order to potentially jeopardize their sort of standing in that political sense. So, for example, euthanasia and abortion are issues that aren't morally straightforward. There's different opinions on whether they're right or wrong. We looked at earlier that voluntary assisted dying legislation in Queensland. So it's difficult to legislate those sorts of things because people's morals are influenced by lots of factors, um, like their religion, their personal experiences, and so there's no clear right or wrong, and it can therefore be difficult to legislate those sorts of things. Now, budgetary constraints can also be a challenge. So their ability to legislate can be limited by what their budget is, and if they only have a certain amount of money, then they may be forced to prioritize certain things over other things because of not having the means financially to do something about the other problems. Political pressures. So I mentioned earlier, politics does intersect with the social divisions idea, but political pressures can influence the parliament's ability to pass legislation. You've got to have the different voting systems in the government where you've got to have a majority in favour. So especially if the existing government is hostile to whatever the change is, that can make it really tricky. And this can also be a budgetary constraint as well. So if the Senate refuses to pass the government's legislation on finance, that can threaten the survival of the government. The nanny state. So this is something that you can think of what a nanny is. We might not really refer to people as a nanny anymore, but someone who is taking care of a child, maybe when their parents are at work. So the nanny state is a political concept, and it's implying that government policies are overprotective or interfere with personal freedoms. And if laws are perceived to be too controlling, they might not be as effective, and that can challenge the parliament's ability to legislate. And lastly, parliament's limitations. So law reform can be hindered if the idea being reformed is established in the Constitution and is thus beyond the reach of Parliament. So this is why having a referendum and passing a referendum is such a big deal, because it's something that can't just be changed. So different legislation can be changed if a new government comes in and they disagree with something a previous government did. That happens often with the government, but a constitutional change can't happen like that. You've got to hold a referendum, like we've recently had with the voice referendum. And as we know, it is notoriously difficult to get referendums passed. You've got to have the majority of states and all of those different requirements there. And so the Constitution does limit what the Parliament can do, since it is so powerful like that.